Hello there. Thank you for joining me for this confirmation baptism new membership thing. We're trying to do this as more of a class all gathered together, and now that coronavirus has struck, we can't exactly be gathering together as a class. So hopefully these videos will at least get us to a point where in the future we can, and hopefully this will be helpful for all of us, looking at the kind of vows that you take when you're going to be baptized and you go into membership in a United Methodist Church, and then looking at some spiritual practices as well. This video is lesson 2, part 1. So lesson 1 with the confirmation class was really just an overview. This is where we really start looking at different vows that you take. Part 2 will look at some Christian practices that will help us grow closer to God, to grow spiritually. But at part 1, we are looking at the vows that we're taking, and the first vow that you take going toward baptism is a vow to reject evil. And to be able to reject evil, you have to ask, what is evil? And some people think that, okay, I can just create a set of rules, and that kind of answers the question. Except it doesn't quite work that way. Your view of actions that are evil and my view of actions that are evil can be completely different. And Christianity has at times made room for that by instead asking, okay, what actually is evil? What is it that makes something evil? And one answer to that is that something being evil means that it opposes God, or it's the opposite of God. God is good. God is true goodness. So if something is evil, it opposes God. And we're going to look at the good next time in lesson 3. But looking at evil, we still then have to ask ourselves, okay, well, if it opposes what's good, then what actually is evil? And St. Augustine provides an answer to that I found extremely helpful. I hope it helps you too. St. Augustine notes that God's self-given name, so God gives a name for God's self in the Bible only one time, when God is talking to Abraham, and God gives the name, I am that I am. That name, as best as we can tell, just means that God exists. God is pure existence. Which then means that whatever is evil somehow is the opposite of that, which means that whatever is evil is moving us away from truly existing. I think that's a super helpful way of looking at what is evil. That evil is non-existence. I think it's really helpful because a lot of the things that we name as evil can very quickly become understandable and why they're evil by looking at how they're somehow not existing. They're not what they are supposed to be, or they move us away from truly existing as we are supposed to. Think about all of the behaviors that we consider inhumane. It could just be things like murder, genocide, abuse. I know that the way that we talk about the way that we treat animals is considered humane or inhumane behavior. The way that we talk about different behaviors are humane or inhumane behavior, or punishments are a humane form of punishment or an inhumane form of punishment. This is kind of where this definition of evil really comes into its own, because when you are doing something inhumane, it makes you less human, and it makes the other person less human. It makes the other person exist less purely. It makes you less than you should be as human. I also think it's helpful because with this definition of evil as moving toward non-existence, it allows us to understand how circumstances, how systems can become evil. Because the circumstances, the systems can make it harder for you to exist, can make you exist less than you should. And it makes those systems wrong. And it makes them objectively wrong, where we're not just saying, well, that system, it's not helpful, that system isn't beneficial, by anchoring a definition of evil as moving toward non-existence. We're preventing existence. It helps us really begin to get a sense of, well, there are some things that I might like that aren't good, that are evil, and there are these other things that I don't like that maybe they're not as bad. I do think it's a very helpful way of looking at what is evil. We'll get into what is good in the next video again, but looking at the evil that we're supposed to reject. I think that this definition is very helpful. And we reject evil in a few forms with our baptismal vow. You would reject the spiritual forces of wickedness. And in doing this, we're admitting that evil isn't just a specific act. That it's not only within the realm of nature. That there are things that pull us toward evil. Whether you personify them as demons or whether you leave them at the level of temptation, we get pulled toward evil. In the world that we live in, we are pulled toward evil. We are pulled toward not existing. And we are committing, by rejecting the spiritual forces of wickedness, that we want none of that. We want what's good, and we are going to reject these forces that pull us toward evil, that pull us away from truly existing. I would say I think it's beneficial to look at evil and admit that there could be things like demons, and not that there's a demon hiding everywhere. That's definitely not anything that I'm going to promote. But as Christians, especially in the United States, we'll talk a lot about angels. God is a spiritual being who is good, and as we're talking about angels and as we're talking about God, it makes sense to admit that there are demons, that there are these spiritual forces of wickedness that are at play. And I don't think we should give them too much credit, but we might want to think about, well, is there something pulling me toward evil? And is that something that is pulling me toward evil possibly doing so intentionally? Is it more than just a random occurrence? So I do think that we should look at it like that. I do think that that's helpful. We also reject the evil powers of this world. And I think it's helpful to think of that as just like the ways of living that pull us toward evil. Sometimes it's a temptation, sometimes it's these spiritual forces, and sometimes it's just the way that the world asks us to operate in the world that pulls us toward evil, that pulls us away from existing as we should, that moves us toward non-existence. The world sets up these systems that are very hard even to see. It's it's in our culture. It's in the air that we breathe, in a sense. That we're just going to go along with it because it's the way that everything is, but they actually pull us toward evil. It pulls us toward non-existence. And then we reject sin, which are the specific actions. Intentional, yes, but also unintentional. We unintentionally sin all the time, and we need to acknowledge that and say that we reject it. And if we find out that we are unintentionally sinning, we are going to do something about it. We're going to try to move away from that, because to have that unintentional sin and to find out that it happened and for us to say, well, I didn't mean to, so it's okay, is us moving toward non-existence. We reject sin. And we reject evil, injustice, and oppression. Acknowledging that it's not just these kind of spiritual things out there. It's not just our culture. It's not just individual acts of sin that pull us toward non-existence. It is systems that we put in place that force some people to have a harder time truly existing than others. There are systems at place, systems of racism, of gender discrimination that push down the existence of some people, and those systems aren't okay. And when you take a baptismal vow in a United Methodist Church, the first thing you say is, in all of these different ways that we find evil in the world, I reject it. I want nothing to do with it. And it's an important first step, because that's where we really start spiritually. We start surrounded by this evil, taking part in this evil, sometimes intentionally through our intentional sin, sometimes unintentionally, just the way that things happen. We continue the culture on that is the way of the world, the evil powers of this world. We give in to the spiritual forces of wickedness. We take part in the systems of oppression. And the first commitment that we make as Christians is that we want to move away from that. Move away from that evil. Move away from non-existence. It's the move that God made at the beginning of creation. There was nothing. God spoke and things were created. And God asks us to take that step of saying, look, go away from the nothing, go away from the chaos of the world, go away from evil. That's this first step that we're taking. And next lesson, we will look at what is good. I floated out a bit of an explanation of that, but that's all what's coming up. But I would encourage you this week, wrestle with that definition of evil, that what is evil is its non-existence. It moves us closer to non-existence. Wrestle with that some. Ask yourself, how are you taking part in evil? Maybe it's the spiritual forces of wickedness. Maybe it is the evil powers of this world. Maybe it's sin. Maybe it's evil, injustice, and oppression. What do you need to reject? So thank you for joining me. I'll see you again later. God bless you.